kind of. Yep. Oh. Whew. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yep. Oh.
That one's gonna.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Yep, that's fine. We're all right. You all right?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Yeah. You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Right.
So basically, I can come over now to you when you're ready. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna straighten out.
Yeah. All right.
Slide out.
It's okay. All right.
Good.
Yep. Good. All good.
Okay.
Yep. 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 Just straighten this leg. That's it. Yep. We're down. Are you all right?
Yeah.
Okay. What it feels like. Oh, okay.
Oh, here we go.
Left leg, it's caught. The foot, no, the other leg. Sorry, right leg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, wow.
Buenas tardes y welcome.
Good evening.
We have just seen the video work of Forest Floor by artists and friends Robbie Singh and Julie Cleves, created in 2020, in which they playfully investigate collaborative solutions to the problems of access to nature faced by people with physical disabilities, in this case in Abernahy Forest in Scotland. We can already see that solutions involve helping each other, sharing, and this is precisely today's topic. It is a concept that showcases the teamwork to create innovative solutions that involve participation, exchange of ideas, and mutual between the groups. Therefore, this is what we, an architecting created in Sants in Barcelona, and community as a keystone of architecture, cooperativism, and participation. This year, we are commemorating the Open program by RCR Wunkand and Count from 2009, together with as a co-organizer together. It collaborates, also means to have economic and logistical support of institutions and companies such as the City Council of Olot, the Banc Sabadell Foundation, Diputació de Girona, the Circle Gest Promat, Peralada Wines, and Centennial Water. This conference has the special support of the HNA Foundation and is beneficiary of the CONECTA by Guillem Costa, Calsamiglia, currently Dean of the Association of Architects of Catalonia, will present Lacol, today represented by Cristina Gamboa, who will speak about rethinking the everyday. Guillem Costa is an architect by the Superior Technical School of Architecture in Barcelona, with more than 10 years of professional experience. He founded in 2010 Costa Calsamiglia Architecture and Studio for the development of architecture and furniture design projects. Together, in parallel, and throughout his career, he has collaborated in publications such as Cuadernos de Arquitectura and Urbanism, and together with the publishing company Gustavo Gili, in addition to participate in the governing bodies of the School of Architects of Catalonia. Costa is a member of the executive committee of Manuel Blanca IV Foundation and patron of the Geneste Foundation. The Architects Association of Catalonia is a member of the board of trustees of RCR Bunca, founded in 1931 and heir to the former Association of Architects of 1874. It is a public corporation that represents Catalan architects, promotes excellence in architecture, and disseminates its values, especially its social and cultural dimension. Today, this organization has 145 years of history. I'll give the floor to Guillem Costa. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. There is kind of an echo, and maybe it's due to the patio architecture. Too much echo? Well, what a pleasure to be with you all here today, here in Olot, in this amazing environment. In this international workshop organized by RCR Architects and the Foundation RCR Bunca and the Order of Architects collaborating through the Girona province and the antenna that they have in Garrocha Ripolles. I'm especially happy because I'm going to introduce this conference of Lacol Architects Cooperative, how to rethink our everyday. This conference will be made by Cristina Gamboa, member of Lacol. Lacol is a collectivity that works from a social and collaborative perspective, aiming at creating spaces offering needs to community housing, trying to get adapted to the needs that need to be rethought. It was founded in Barcelona in 2009. Lacol is a cooperative where all the members they actively participate when taking decisions and managing the projects. This way of working put at the same level all the cooperation of all the participants to share all the values and to share this gathered vision. Therefore, sharing, is it a concept? Is it an idea that they do have in Lacol? Share, as you know, is the main axis of this cycle of conferences. Sharing in architecture as a concept is fundamental to promote collaboration between professionals, neighbors, citizens, users, working together to know what's the functional purpose and the role of the project, for architects to create all these spaces that will give an answer to collective needs, setting the priorities of common good beyond individual interests. This way of working strengthens communities, offering more creative communities and solutions, usually more innovative. This summer workshop RCR together with the students of architecture is a great example of sharing in architecture. It is a valuable opportunity to explore new techniques, share new ideas, to look for new materials, and to jointly find real solutions for architectural issues. The interaction offers perspective and knowledge to boost the process of creativity, boosting as well the commitment of all participants. Sharing and the way of sharing, Cristina from Lacol will talk about it, and how all together we can face the projects, how projects work when dealing with community housing projects, how we can work with the public space projects, and also how can we work in collective spaces, those spaces in the threshold of the public and private sphere. Manuel de Sola Morales always mentioned that, and how they work when refurbishing buildings in urban projects. An amazing and a very important factor that I like to underscore that belongs to Lacol is the fact that in their methodology, they include active participation of local communities, promoting participatory processes, involving future users when creating the new designs of their future spaces. Lacol not only creates aesthetics and functional architecture, also contributes to empower communities in order to create spaces that will reflect the different needs and identities as well. Allowing local communities to share their opinions, suggesting ideas, collaborating directly with different professionals is also sharing. This collaboration guarantees that the final project to satisfy all user needs and simultaneously creating a sense of belonging, a sense of responsibility, a sense of commitment towards this space. Promoting all these participatory projects, they have multiple profits, such as increasing transparency and trust amongst professionals and communities, because inhabitants, they can witness that they are listened. Secondly, we create more innovative design solutions adapted to the specific context and environment, because people that work and live in those spaces offer life experiences and practical knowledge that maybe the architects are not aware of. And finally, active participation overcomes future conflicts, because users, they will be more open-minded to take care of the spaces that they together created with the professionals. Who else and who better than to talk about the methodology and to talk about the approaches of projects than Cristina? We will have the opportunity to listen to her. Thank you very much. Cristina from Lacol Arquitectes. Thank you so much. Hello, good afternoon. Good evening. Thank you very much for this generous introduction, and thank you for inviting me, for letting me to participate in your projects and also to acknowledge the work that the students are making possible during the workshops. Excuse me if I'm not speaking properly in Spanish. I was asked to speak in Spanish. To rethink the everyday. This is the title that we proposed. I'm going to organize my speech around several subjects that are interrelated. As we mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we are talking about a collective practice. I'm just a single voice that tells the work of a whole cooperative, different stakeholders, agents, actors, users that are constantly changing. This is the result of a very specific moment. Once we finished our studies, it was 2011-2012, we suffered this systemic economic crisis at that time. So in the end, it was a space of conflict, but it also was a great space for opportunities to rethink the role that we could have as architects and how we could contribute to better define the practices and the profession that we have in the city. And we can see that there is a trajectory after being students and sharing our work. Altogether, we wanted to boost this dynamic, and in 2014, we became a non-profit cooperative. And in 2024, we celebrated our 10th anniversary, 10 years of trial and error, 10 years of learning based on this horizontal, on this structure of different assemblies that allow us to walk and to share our weaknesses and strengths, and to create this very fertile space for discussion, for thinking, to see new perspective for methodologies and different axes in order to work with. We realized that we are an organic body and our work is interrelated with the architecture in itself, the housing politics, the building management, and more than ever, different transformation strategies for urban planning and also eco and green social transition. How can we produce locally, consume local energy, and to share all the resources? These challenges, in the end, become answers from the space where we are working with, and how everything is interrelated from a collective and individual perspective as well. This cooperative ecosystem is not invented by us. It's something that borns in the neighborhoods where we are. I'm talking about the Sants, is a low-class neighborhood where the consumption cooperatives began more than a century ago. So being students, knowing the neighborhood, knowing the different origins, roots, and different experiences and the background, knowing the practices as well of the individuals living there. This allowed us to understand how people got organized, the values of a cooperativism that reach up today. It is a neighborhood that was born after the factories, with these first infrastructures of the consumption cooperatives. We can see that there are some subtle elements. They were able to create different devices to comply with the more basic needs. But these cooperatives are also spaces for resistance, spaces for fight, for self-organization, to have a working class identity, spaces for collective practices that allowed the working class to get organized and to go beyond these spaces with the different experiences all along the history, mainly with the First and Second Spanish Republic. These cooperatives were a device in the environment that boost different politics for social cooperation, and these allow us to witness the different experiences they were able to create these local production systems, the interaction between the rural and the urban environments, projects that were born after needs or that went through transportation, housing, food. We tried to see how all these strategies were applied in the past and can be implemented in our daily life. How can we adapt them in our everyday situation today? That's why that after 5, 6 years working all together, we thought about our main purpose. What's our vision, mission as a cooperative? As Andrea said, the idea to work, to create community infrastructures. That's the main idea. How to have this instrument, this tool, this device created through the community, offering collective answers to individual needs. Everything is translated into these kind of spaces for consumption, living spaces, and in a very old factory in Can Batlló, we work together with the different neighbors of the neighborhood, working with the different warehouses of this factory. We had the chance to create this greenhouse for cooperatives. It was like a pilot project. It was a temporary project. The City Council of Barcelona already had a plan to formally transform one of these warehouses. We only wanted to give more accessibility, to give minimal conditions, just starting with the existing remains of the materials, such as the different tools that were used in the industry, also the carpenters that work in this warehouse, and the teams that allowed the maintenance of the environment thanks to the support of the Barcelona City Council. The interaction with all the actors allow us to have this space that will be dismantled and will be reused for a new purpose. Here you can see the first module, the first phase. It was a space for the technical team to give new assistance and to offer support to all the individuals that wanted to create these cooperatives. This is the main warehouse of this factory, and we wanted to create different levels of porosity and to have much more interconnected. We had in the lower part like a cube inside the bigger space. We opened again these spaces towards the street, creating the light from the sun. It was a very dark space. We created these new interconnections, and just with the tiny manipulations like the central ceiling that offered this big ceiling window, letting the light to get inside, respecting what we already had, respecting the non-physical and physical resources. And through this manipulation and handling the roof, opening the existing doors, creating these comfort spaces, but also creating new accessibility from the street, being able to create those spaces that all the technicians will offer with support inside the classrooms, the different materials and resources were related with the same. And also temporality, knowing that at least we had 5 years and all these materials can be dismantled and put together and to move it to another place. So this in a nutshell was the outer image that without touching anything, we created a much more livable space. This was like a cluster that we did it, and we repeat it in other Catalan spaces for social economy, creating other dynamics in the neighborhood that allowed to replicate this model. Looking for new spaces for new cooperatives, we had Lacol. Lacol is one of the 10 cooperatives and social projects that belong to the common projects that we are sharing. We found an old school. It was a factory that produced sales, manufactured sales. It was property owned, privately owned, and we wanted to create this new social economy center aiming at opening towards the city, creating a new facade, a new square. The facade was totally destroyed. It was a dialogue together with the Department of Architectural Heritage. It was a facade that had to be protected, and we could reproduce the popular facade, the poor version without any kind of decoration. And in the interiors, we were able to make that all projects to get adapted to the different activities. Here I can share with you a very short video and how this project was developed together with the neighborhood. We could build from there onwards a new part. You can see how the different projects coexist with the different spaces and how everything was transformed with their own resources. So this is the role of the architect, this basic infrastructure that surrounds everything for the users to be the owners of these spaces between these party walls, spaces between projects, spaces as well with heritage, spaces between the different warehouses that become circulation, process, and services, like interspaces. These interstice spaces didn't have an heritage value, but they became new spaces to get condition much better, to give a new sense to all the spaces. We could look and find these new materials, materials that were recovered, they were greatly kept, and this coexistence between the new infrastructure and the environmental devices such as these greenhouses and the past. So we defined this strategy in different stages. We had different insertion of different infrastructures for circulation, for having new trajectories such as the bathrooms, the office, the kitchen, and the different purposes and uses that we will have in the future. Well, we can see that this is almost empty. It is a very simple construction, and these interspaces that allowed to give a new sense to the main facade of the building. We were able also to have new lighting, and we only have this new build facade to create this interior space, which is mainly an access, but it's also a new square that will be a climate shelter for a new structure for the neighborhood. It's a place for meetings, for celebrations, to develop activities. It belongs to the communal building, but the people from the area can take advantage of these spaces. Therefore, we are able to create these new synergies, creating a new masterpiece for the city, a place that was completely closed in itself. Self-management, looking for new opportunities to the city, giving answers to the needs. This project was possible because we suffer the gentrification effects, but we can find these new spaces for fight against this gentrification that we are, these interstice spaces, these interspaces, and the relationship with the different areas as well. These are practices amongst different actors such as sociologists, economists, architects, offered us some tools like being able to jungle with this crisis and to overcome the crisis of housing in the city of Barcelona, and to understand how we need cheaper housing, but also the right to the city, the right to health, the right to having a stable life, and after the different energy crisis that we all experienced, the right to comfort, the right to energy. So we started to work with all these community infrastructures from the different housing cooperatives to develop these projects? Well, cooperatives that mainly, they have the challenge to rethink the everyday. To us, rethinking our everyday is to rethink how do we work, how we interact with other actors, with the existing elements, but also with elements, traditions, and habits and values that are deeply enrooted in our society. The construction of the culture of the contemporary Spanish identity as well has always been related with the idea of being an owner and this entrenchment with the idea of being an owner. But the responsible for housing said that we don't want a society of the proletariat, but we want a society of the owners. Therefore, there is a new relationship with the housing, which is very complicated. It was also the beginning of the speculation period. So basically, from architecture, it's very interesting to understand that we do not only work building what's already built, but also taking into account the immaterial and how these conditions of being an owner, the individual properties, were also conditioning once we wanted to redesign the architecture. Cooperatives are based in a very simple system. They are non-profit organizations, collectively owned. The cooperatives are the owners of the buildings, and the inhabitants, they have an unlimited use of the housing unit. We want to stop speculation. The user is not the owner, cannot change, cannot be the owner, cannot give a value to the house. But the value of use, understanding housing as a right in a collateral manner, all these projects were able to put at the center the community. These projects are led by communities, self-managed, with a cooperative self-governance, cheap, accessible, sustainable from a political, economic, and social perspective. They didn't want to offer an answer to one specific need of a community. They wanted to be a model to be reproduced and repeated, a model with capital letters, a model that is emerging and offering housing in a much more cheaper and stable way for the citizens. Well, we began the first experience of this collective housing. We were very young. We just finished our studies. It was a constant learning process. Tuas Laborda, as the first process, was a trial and error experience, and we witnessed that there were different strategies that were related to the conditions of the model, collective ownership, self-organization, self-participation with the different architecture solutions. Therefore, we are talking about a process that allowed to build this community when constructing, when making architecture, to create trust between people and amongst architects. Also understanding the different conditions of the legal and economic parts, creating new processes to work with collaborators, users, the public administration, the technicians, allowing us to understand that the regulation and the legislation in Barcelona dates for more than 40 years ago. We had to go to the limits and reaching the fringes to create a new space for dialogue, being able to create new results. You can see the process of the cooperative creation, creating more complex. We had the General Assembly, the different work commissions, and finally we reached to a moment where we have different teams, such as the one that Lacol, working together with the Assembly and the Architecture Commission, setting the new milestones for this collective construction and trying to find new purposes after everything is built, creating new languages, making accessible architecture to people. this conversation with the crystal clear words, easy to understand. People being able to appropriate the vocabulary, to understand the different instruments of architecture and the role that architecture has when transforming our everyday practices. How can we deploy different instruments to take into account the gender elements, the environmental elements, to have a critical perspective and letting people to be more aware about the impact of the spaces on their daily lives. Also, we had the opportunity to build different models. They were able to draw their house, different needs, and to implement everything into a new infrastructure. It was a process to understand the shared needs and to see in how these projects finally reach a level that allowed people to be satisfied through new processes of imagination and to understand where we are able to create and to be aware that needs are changing as a group, but also as an individual, how we get old, how we have kids, we create families and homes, and how we create different levels of community. The first space for reflection was this urban scale. We had to understand how Barcelona had a neighborhood and infrastructure system with libraries, other centers, culture, orchards, gardens, public spaces, walking spaces, how to understand all these different levels for not to create a closed community, but to create communities that should be opened, and how the cooperative spaces could be useful spaces for the environment and the surroundings of the city. And once we were able to broaden this transition, creating new common spaces, we could witness that they had an impact. We were able to create not a minimal unit, but to recreate new units. What common and collective spaces we could have to get an impact in these common spaces, shared spaces such as staircases, the different levels, the entry spaces, the hallways, the receptions, how to create these interspaces, spaces that were common spaces that had social and economic impact, to recreate these spaces from a gender perspective. And thanks to the work that was made by the Cohabitation Commission, we created different protocols, and we were able to see how architecture was adapted to the needs. We created an architecture that was able to create future needs and to satisfy the future needs that were different amongst the different communities. Once we developed the program, this articulation from the urban level to the domestic level, the home level, we had the opportunity to develop a collective strategy to start this transition between the public, the private spaces, the common elements to the individual elements, and the environment played a vital role. That's why we talk about different levels of comfort. It is important to understand the level of discomfort, what we understand as comfort, what are the comfort patterns. Sometimes we do have in mind material levels, but we thought about the climate comfort levels. What do we need to be in comfort? What do we need to feel at ease? The light, the water, the air. How can we have different quality levels for summer, for winter? Do we use the same spaces the same way to have a different quality spaces all along the building? This first floor, that's a public space open towards the new park, spaces that in winter are cooler, but in winter they are shelters for the heat. Also, the southern facade allowed us to understand that houses are the places where we are for the majority of the time in our daily life. So this idea of environmental comfort, but also the comfort of privacy, how can we create different typologies? And here we wanted to understand this was a collective property, how to create this matrix of spaces that are intertwined, interrelated, something that allowed us to start to work with different typologies. It was very important, the legal aspects, how to create a house able to grow, to decrease, to reduce the volume, the surface, how to create a mechanisms that will offer an answer, the installations that were ready, the doors should be open, not, but always taking into account the legal aspects. We do have 6 units per floor, 2 bedroom spaces, 17 square meters. And well, the situation of discomfort and comfort, these rooms are big. The rooms are small, 40 square meters, which is the minimum surface, legal surface, with the common spaces that could be connected and disconnected and could be used in a discontinuous manner. Different strategies that allow us to reverse the roles that the spaces played all a long time and to have a deeper analysis of the different needs during the first phase of the cooperative. And the final project strategy that we had was how to build and also how to opt for an FLT structure of different walls that allow us to have this idea in mind, kind of a box. Once we had the main structure, we were able to fill the spaces inside. And once we created this building, a passive building, where the environment offered an answer to architecture, there was the process of appropriation. We can see this corridor in the lower floor, this cooperative for consumption, and how the collective life stems from the city and is infused in the building, in the collective spaces of the different houses, how the community shows everything towards the streets, different kitchen spaces, this collective patio that connects all the community, the street with the different levels, and these technologies that allow this control of the inner spaces, that allowed us also to have these external spaces and patios to dry the clothes on the linen, to play in summer, and these naked spaces that are implemented, these spaces that are interrelated, that are featured by the user, protection systems, manual systems, that make that the user to be an active user, that little by little becomes the owner of these spaces. And once we are able to put order in these spaces, will allow the first experiences of sharing, how measures, routines, habits, these cooperatives that has the power to decide and to control as well, can create new protocols, can boost and strengthen this resilience towards life. These ideas that I shared since the La Borda experience, and very, very rapidly, I'll give you some hints about how we created these new cooperatives in which we are in, such as the case of La Palma, which is a much more compact project in Poblano. The transition from the public space is articulated in the building. It was inside a very well-equipped axis with a social housing. There was a high school, a hospital, a cultural center, and suddenly we are there with this collective housing. How to understand this relationship with the house, with the street, the articulation of the meeting points, the meeting spaces, bringing the balconies inwards, like new eyes towards the city, this staircase that allow this promenade, this first floor that suddenly becomes a Porsche as well. And here there was a very important decision that was taken, how this space was also an environmental control space. the level of transition, the level of comfort, the southwestern facades with a very high level of sun exposure, with the north facades with loads of traffic. So this decalage allowed to have these different roads and paths, the protection of the house from the reserved spaces, also the kitchens, the meeting spaces as well, these shared spaces, the staircase for you to go to the laundry, to go to the roof. Well, you need to get through, and you have a great relationship with the city, and this back and forward allowed us to question the role of a closed staircase, like a minimum space that becomes a privileged space that accompany you towards the street, the spaces for the neighborhood, and the park that we can see at the end of the picture that gets in. And the level of porosity is important. And how in this equipped space, collective housing space, well, we were able to create this bargaining space, this meeting space as well. And mainly this typology that can be small, big, medium, creating new housing projects allow the user to define if they had a relationship with the promenade in the space, in the private space, the public space. We do have different typologies towards the north, toward the south, allow the user to have this cross-related and relationship and from a manual and from very specific instructions, well, we were able to draw different experiences that we take on board for every project. And this idea of the non-hierarchical support is a project that we will be implementing very shortly. And basically, what do we have? We do have a community inside the community. In Switzerland, as in many other countries as well, we have this idea of clusters, small typologies that shared common spaces inside a bigger community, giving answer to lonely people that want to redefine the concept of family as well, but also the elderly people. This was kind of a floor that could be repeated, and suddenly we do have this cluster that becomes a new model for housing. We can see a very similar geometry, very specific geometry, and what do? We democratize this southern facade. We bring all the houses to the most privileged facade, and we create a discontinuity between the rooms, and we set in the middle this dining kitchen room. So it is an opportunity that allowed us to introduce the mechanisms of the clusters and non-normative shapes of living, ways of living. And the final project that I'd like to offer you is the La Morada Cooperative. It is a cooperative made by lesbian women and LGBTQI+, right? Collective, and they do imagine and they want to visualize that this, sometimes women, that the women, they suffer economic inequalities, therefore it's more difficult for women to have access to housing. But it's also a space to change the role of gender in when caring the others. And once we stop this patriarchy family model, how to take care of the other collectively and how to get older together, we can see this group of people, they wanted to be there in this new space and to begin this architecture project. And we began with this idea of our own room. Differently from other projects, there was this need to have a private space, the idea of a safe space, the idea of this space that allowed the transitions, also the transitions of the different bodies, and to be the owner of this space. In this case, more than in the others, we can see that the transition architecture in La Borda, La Balma, we do have lots of rooms related with the different gangways and bridges that sometimes lack of privacy. You can see how you interact with communities. In this specific case, there was a clear need to have the ownership of a room in this more distant facade towards the outer space, and the kitchen, like a women's space that is the main access to the house. Therefore, we'll have this gangway that creates these models, and we had a very low and very small patio, and these different bridges and pedestrian towards the outer space. It is a project that's more updated, and it has a neighbor, the Ciudades cooperatives. Therefore, there are some elements to create these dialogues with this balcony that greets the new cooperatives as well. These relational spaces looking for closing this very small and tiny patio is a self-constructed block, as you can see. Instead of having first floor plus four floors, it was like being the owner of this more hostile environment to create these visions and these shapes and models that are dealing very well when overcoming the rules and the legislation and this internal area in this architecture using the afterwar projects. More people working, but to reduce the amount of materials and to create this new architecture. And finally, this idea of being replicable, how to replicate, and how we can learn. Well, we wanted to be in a contest, the southern facade, the northern facade. We didn't win the contest, but we can create these new imaginaries in these spaces, creating different variations from La Borda, La Barda, Sutrak. These are one of the projects that I shared with you. Other projects that have been, that are developed, such as Abril and Amplio. But I'd like to share with you two main challenges. And these two examples that are very small, La Domestica and La Bombeta. These are two cooperatives that use an existing building. And we were thinking about this idea, how to transform the city and how to create new cooperatives with the people that already live there in these existing buildings. We have a very old factory that belonged to the historical fabric of the neighborhood, but also how to get new collectivities and how new people, mainly senior people that work for the elderly cooperatives that want to be together and to have new ways to care with the others, people with different functional and handicaps, problems that have a great solution in this. And also we have big question marks for architecture. How can these non-normative spaces, I did like the idea that we began with this very short clip. Sometimes we are not aware about the privileges and how to give access to multiple bodies and diversity as well. These are one of the challenges that cooperatives are facing today. Well, this is what I wanted to share. Basically, the main message is that the projects are resilient projects in the cities facing these social and emergency problems. I had a very short clip, a clip that we did it during COVID lockdown, and how an unexpected situation allowed this relationship between the different inhabitants with some distance, for sure, safe distance, creating care protocols, a very small school for kids that were in the projects, and how adults could overcome the combination of taking care of children and jobs and work and these solidarity spaces, but also spaces to share the needs, different life experiences. Suddenly, these common spaces became meeting points for counters, also training centers and fitness centers, taking care of the others, those that had the disease, or those that were afraid, or those that really wanted to take care of the others. Well, basically, we realized that the building had a new life, being able to face the unexpected. And, well, just with this very short clip, I wanted to conclude my intervention. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Well, now we'll have time for questions and answers. I guess that you'll have loads of questions as well. Excuse my Spanish, it's not. I am Luisa, I come from Brazil. I think that this issue really of housing is very important in Brazil as well, because we are suffering a lack of spaces to live in. Do you think that it will be possible to have this collaborative or participatory project, but in a bigger scale, maybe with more people, more actors? What do you think? Is it possible? Because I can see that the projects are small and they have a great relationship with community. Could you intervene in a bigger size? Well, maybe today I didn't mention that, but at the end of the day, the housing cooperatives, they exist for more than a century in Switzerland, more than 50 years ago in Uruguay, more than a century ago in Denmark, and in many Latin American countries as well. As an example, in Uruguay, housing cooperatives belong to public policies allowed to build huge neighborhoods, and you can see like big pavilions, big warehouses packed with people that belong to the processes. Also, if you go to Switzerland, you can see urban cooperatives, but also they are developing new models in other areas. Very different models, such as the Uruguay one, self-construction model in the case of Uruguay, through different multidisciplinary teams that are able to organize in a very astonishing way this multitudinary work, but also in Switzerland, where you have these delegation processes. Really, many people working in different projects, they will never leave the spaces, people that will leave a little bit later. There are different mechanisms for reproduction, and you can scale up. Yeah, you can do it. These, yes, you're right, they are very, very small projects. They have less than 10 years of history, but in reality, well, we can find different references at global level that belongs to the construction of cities. And also in Brazil, I know that there are other projects always related with social movements, such as movements of creating movements or the Sem Terra movements. I think it's very interesting to see in all the contexts the different experiences, the own experiences in different places, and also the cultural background of the different places to be aware about how to implement and not to impose something from the outside that maybe we could fail. Do we have more questions? Anyone else would like to clarify something? Please be bold. Don't be shy. Maybe I speak too fast, too much information. All right. Living in such different typologies where houses and homes can be recreated because we do not need more privacy and we can have a common and better elements. This urban speculation really understood very well. I come from Tarragona, and suddenly we saw a skyscraper of co-livings and co-housings. What do they do? they offer less for much more. So what I mean by that, we can reduce the traditional living spaces because they do not look towards new ways of living through a fitness center, a swimming pool, and they can pick your speech and to alter it. How can we be aware of it? Because it can be very dangerous, because your model is very beautiful, but behind the scenes we can see that the evil ones will take advantage to make the evil real. Yeah, your comment is very important, of course, because in the Barcelona case, and this is something that I didn't mention, but we talk about the public spaces, land, public land. The public administration offers this land to the cooperative after a tender. Therefore, the land is a public land, and the houses are classified as protected houses. What do we understand? With our work, we had the opportunity to work in Barcelona urban plan, housing plan in 2016, 2019. We had the opportunity to coordinate the housing plan in Barcelona City Council. We were committed, and it was a and strategy that completed the housing that was needed in the city as well. It was a way to promote and to be on the process, a process that can be well, some people can be excluded of the process. People that do not know the model, they do not know how to get closer to the process. They don't have time. There are citizens, maybe a mother, a single mother family that doesn't have time, cannot know about the project, and there are also behind the scenes an initial amount of money that is needed. Therefore, it is a process that really needs to be universal and to have an easier access for the others. We are aware, let's be self-critics, it's not universal. But in the end, we try to make efforts to overcome social challenges such as the getting older, but it's not a universal solution, Let's try to be humble. Inside the cooperative, there are many ways to live. Not everybody lives with the same way of life. Or sharing. Sharing is also different between the different inhabitants. To us, it was the main purpose to create cheap housing. We are also very self-critics with these discourses and these perspectives, and they can, be used to take advantage and to minimize and to take profit of this mindset, philosophy, and to finally speculate with that. Or to have temporary houses for a specific kind of user. We, in conclusion, we did previous work for community and cooperative, and we do believe in the role of a public administration. We do believe in the regulation and the legislation. A colleague from the United States, I think that he came from San Francisco or LA, he said that suddenly many projects of this kind appeared. They began with 10 units per a kitchen, 20 units per a kitchen, and to have the biggest profit, well, there were like 40 housing units for a single kitchen, right? So the main goal finally was to create this minimum cell of housing. And from then on, they created a new articulation to better improve the situation and to better articulate these devices of housing devices, right? So in the end, as any kind of program or regulation, we can see this double role. It's very difficult to control from the architecture sector, but we do have the ability to regulate these programs. It is true that the new regulation and in the law of housing that was produced in 2022, I don't remember, the last one allowed with this idea of a housing as well. Well, how can we understand this minimum surface of 40 meters? And this allowed to create the clusters and the different typologies and to have some level to experiment, something that is positive. And this allowed us to, well, when you see the legislation, the marriage room, in the regulation you can find this, the marriage room, the couple room. So we're kind of obsolete. Of course, we are against those that take advantage of our mindset, of our philosophy. I don't have a magic pill, but how to give more visibility to our ideas, this is important. And I do believe in the role that the public administration plays as well. Very, very interesting. Everything that you said. How from you go from the users that are able to create a product. We as citizens and consumers, we are used to have a product in front of us and we can buy it or not. It's great to make it differently. Let's think about the product that I need and let's create it. How can we invigorate this as a system, not only buying the houses that the market offers, but the opposite? Let's proceed and in a different way. Let's find what we need and then build what we need, right? You know why? Changing the dynamics and that's why I talk about the culture and the mindset of being the owner, the ownership. Being or paying a rent is throwing away the money. And you go to Switzerland, I think that in Zurich they have an amount of people that rent the houses that's very, very high. So we should realize that there are some mechanisms, that there are some patterns, something that we have preset in our model, in our mindset. And also it is important to wish to live differently, to dream to live differently. And probably due to the climate change crisis or the resource crisis, if we could not survive, how we will solve? Once you start working with a project, you rethink the housing system, the different equipments. There is a model of shared ownership. We can create a cooperative for energy. And suddenly you realize that, well, the next step forward would be to work differently and to make things differently, right? Let's detect the opportunity spaces and spots. And to us, from the everyday practice, that's a place to work from. That's a place to be. The everyday practices. So from theory to practice, to detect the opportunity space. And to me, that's the key. And these projects, of course, they don't want to be like manifestos, but they pretend to be something that make us to question. And if suddenly someone really questions the models that we have in our society, well, this will be kind of a success. Every project wants to be and to make a step forward, but the steps that are very small, tiny steps, if we take into account the changes that society needs. This is what we do. What's the starting point? From top down to impose things. To us, this is kind of violence. We do believe more in doing things from bottom to the top. And this is a little bit the history of Lacol cooperative. And each and every one of the projects are able to create new experiences and to plant new seeds. And this is how we reimagined these changes to the questions that appear to our minds. We don't know if this is the good way to do or the bad way. It was the only one that we found for the moment being. Do we have more questions? All right. No, no. I think that everything is thought from living, or maybe we could share the idea of living and working and to find new uses to housing. Have you ever thought about it? Because your perspective is only very centered in living spaces. You know, once we see international projects, you realized that there is kind of a mixture of ownership and cooperatives that coexist with rent processes and lending processes. There are projects in Zurich, in Switzerland, that they have the culture centers, the offices, well, we do have a limitation because the land is publicly owned, and there are different classifications for the land. Depending on the classification of the land, we can have a house or culture center. In La Borda case, there is like an organization, right? How to break the limits of the public spaces and to create commercial and stores and commercial spaces. There is always nowadays a limitation relying on the land use classification. Right now, we are working in models that allow to introduce cooperatives that won't be in a public land, but will be cooperatives that will be created from the private, let's say, such as community land trusts, private entities sharing the ownership. And therefore, in these cases, yes, we will open the door to new possibilities. That's where if also for energy management, once a house consumes more in the morning or the other house consumes more at night, or maybe how to find new resources in waste or better water management. So we work from a neighborhood scale to see new research projects and how these synergies could be created and how a cooperative can be interrelated with different buildings and to share the same program. I think that the challenge and the opportunity has to do with the reuse that we do of the city and how we can recreate new spaces through the existing spaces and how empty spaces can be used by the cooperative and how buildings can give a new value to a roof or an empty store that was empty for many years and how everything could be managed from these mechanisms. And so we can work to create new elements to this new mix of strategies. And this is happening, right? So we need to change the perspective, but sometimes the legal and politics issues that create some obstacles and hindrances. But that's the role of these spaces, right? The limitations many times are not physical limitations. Usually they are abstract limitations, right? They don't have a specific shape or category, so it could be possible. Hello, Cristina. I am really interested when you talked about it. It was really interesting to me once you talked about the idea that you recovered buildings. I think Barcelona and many Spanish cities, they have like a huge park of buildings. And this is one of the biggest challenges that the architects have. We talk about the refurbishing and energy renewal and refurbishment is something, and renewing is a broader scope, right? Lacatón Basal, they talk about not to derelict the buildings and not to destroy the buildings. It is this motto. And my generation and your generation as well, we realize that mainly in European cities, we must be careful because the 18th and 19th buildings that are very well built, they need to be kept and renewed from an energy perspective. You talked about Domestica and the other one, I don't remember the name, made me think about this question. How can we be more aware about the attitude that we need when we renew and when we refurbish a building? I think that's very important that my generation, but mainly your generation, and not only the architects, but also the promoters and the public administration, they should be aware about the need of renewing, including the energy renewal. This is what the new Bauhaus is asking for, right? Let's make cities to consume less and simultaneously to have pretty and beautiful cities. Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. I took advantage to share what I think about our cities, but you guys that you are there right now, going from these new construction processes to renewing the buildings, what can we do? What would be the actions? And how could we spread the message to all the Barcelona architects and to all other cities? Well, you know, ourselves from Lacol, we had in mind this idea on to transition. This energy transition was very important to us. Therefore, we create like a teamwork with other cooperatives to find spaces and new opportunities. That's where we had the chance to see these energy communities. Energy communities, they have a legal framework. It's kind of a cooperative that allows to produce their own energy, but in the end, they are kind of actors that allow exchanging energy, but also to boost renewal projects. So we can see that there are new opportunities as well. And as for these cooperatives that I shared with you, the most interesting thing is to understand that it's not only energy renewal, but also how can we offer to the city these spaces that have a social impact, this transition towards sustainability that must be social, economical, and also energy. In Spain, in Barcelona, I think that we should better manage the existing building park and how to manage it and how to transform it. Right now, we're working in the format of a cooperative. It is easier to manage the users because they do have their own dynamics, they do have their collective decisions that are taken. There is also a collective investment, right? That's a challenge as well. And through the processes, I don't know how to say in Spanish, the framework agreement. Yes, we do belong to this framework agreement. This framework agreement is a project that allocates European funds to transform the most vulnerable communities at the outskirts of Barcelona. In Barcelona, there are also fragile communities, but in Barcelona, we do have cities such as Hospitalet, Cornellà, and in the Besses River, we are working with these communities with a system for cooperative management. With this work that they work in parallel to transform these different communities as well. Therefore, the challenge is very, very interesting because we can see that they are vulnerable parts in a very, very precarious construction, people living inside with very, very precarious conditions, and the levels of habitability are very low. But suddenly you also realize how these strategies that you can use in specific place are useless to another place. To understand the role of community when defining the strategies, what is the heating system that they will use? Maybe they will never pay for the heating system. If you have active solutions for ventilations, maybe they don't have the knowledge or the habit to implement these strategies. It could be very interesting to see in reality and to be aware about the social, but also the physical condition. The social condition really belongs to the renewal processes. To us, is essential. And we will have a great opportunity to discover and to create new architecture because in the end, well, in this threshold space, in the fringes of renewal, I was talking about because I think that architects, men and women, we need to believe in the renewal and because next generation funds a little bit, they change a little bit our perspective. Well, we change the facade, we change the heating system under carpentry, and I think that we, as architects, we must fight that we are the ones that have the vision to renew everything as a whole. You know, sometimes in the end, we do work in a broad manner in architecture, but some part of the work that we do doesn't need to build more and more and build and build and build. Sometimes it's also very difficult to define who we are because behind the scenes there is this part of work, how to manage what's already built and to stop building. And this is to redefine what the work that we play as architects. So yes, you're right. This could be the final question. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm quite interested about the topic of you, let's just say, you design the housing for LGBTQ plus community, and I was wondering how you solve their problems through the architectural way, because in my school, we used to have a class about solving the patriarchy architecture, and I want to know how you discover the problem, the obstacle, and how you solve it.
Bueno, fan una traducció, oi? Vull dir, creo que quizá
I think that the idea is not to solve a problem.
hemos visto como el hecho de que podamos. Creo que es más el hecho de visibilizar
The idea is to give more visibility.
y otras necesidades.
It's not to create new ways of
En
living.
ese sentido, bueno,
What
básicamente
we really vindicate since the beginning is to understand how this kind of housing
transformando
that was transformed little by little and very slowly. We began, we had the palaces,
incluso en una
spaces that, you know, they had neutral spaces towards a much more specialized vision of the housing that had this hierarchy, the single room, double room, the corridor that separates, you know, what you said, the patriarchy of the architecture. We began to work with La Morada, the LGBTQ plus collective. We had a workshop for specialized architecture. They worked in a workshop to have a non-gender house. And each member, they talk about what they remember of their childhood, the spaces where we lived, where they lived, how were the spaces, and they talk about the relationship with the kitchen, the women, the mother, the care of the elderly ones, and they share during the workshops these ideas, and we read different texts. We read the theory of architecture together with the new members of this cooperative. Also, we read about feminist theories and materialistic theories. We wanted the girls to connect with the ideas and to fight for their ideas because they are political beings. They live politics on their daily basis. They are very active when they walk and they fight for their ideas. We wanted them to understand that from architecture there were these speeches and these ideas, and they could be the owners of these architectural ideas. We didn't give them an answer. It was the opposite. We didn't give an answer. They, them, all together, men, women, binary, non-binary, through the questions, they questioned the decisions that were taken, that we took. You know what was the most interesting thing? the most interesting thing was that the processes of a cooperatives, we have the design part, we have the construction part, we have the promotion and the selling part, how to make the project to land in this place. They were radical. They were radical once they questioned how the process satisfied their needs. Of course, the process was very long. It really demanded a lot of time and effort, how to get adapted to the different components and how who build the work. I'll try to implement all the criteria of equity in people is almost impossible because and how to see in the construction company in the promoter there were equality gender plans as well, but also to be aware that we were talking about a collectivity. Roquetas, the neighborhood of Roquetas, is a very popular neighborhood with a very strong and feminist movement of the neighbors. So it was very, very difficult, right? Not to feel superior, because maybe the girls, they came from higher class groups. How to respect the neighbors in the neighborhood as well. It was a learning process to better know what's feminism. We didn't solve anything. We learned in an ongoing basis. We learned from all the collectivities to give a new meaning to this queer or feminist. We can put any kind of level that you want to put to this kind of architecture, right? I don't know. Did you get the message? What about the translation? Is it right? Happy with that? Can you make me a sign? Okay.
I didn't quite catch it because you speak very fast. But I think the main point is to ask the question for ourselves.
I will talk in English to avoid maybe the translation, if it's easy. But basically, I said that we didn't solve any problem, that basically, as a collective with her values and own experiences, were really facing or pushing with questions all the process of producing architecture, but not only the design, which in a way we start with a workshop called The House Without Gender, and then also with readings about feminism and space to make them more aware about how they narrative can be applied to the space. But the biggest learning was that precisely by the questions that they are constantly they are basically the way that they are kind of understanding their relations with themselves, with the others. They were always challenging the process of producing architecture, like the way that the development, the calendar, the timings, the design itself with a non-hierarchical floor plan, but also how the accessibility and also this idea of the different bodies can use the building, but also who can build if there is also equality in the construction site, if there is no inequalities or kind of dynamics. I was also in the construction, and always it's quite challenging, a woman in the construction site. So, and basically also arriving to the neighborhood where they were really respectful with all the feminists and all the dynamic movements that were already in the place. No? So basically for me it was a lesson about what it means to build a feminist city through their own experience. No? So basically that I could not solve anything. Basically they had all the knowledge about that. And we are basically kind of tools to kind of give to a space all kind of the thoughts that and ideas that they were kind of having by themselves. I don't know if it was kind of more easy to understand it.
Okay, thank you.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, Cristina. Yo creo que esto ha sido una sesión muy interesante y seguiremos hablando estos días de aquello, de todo lo que hemos oído.
No,
Así
muchas
que,
gracias a
muchas
todos.
gracias.
Gracias.